Hi, welcome to CLiKD's Creative Interviews. Hi guys, welcome to our latest creative interview, and I am in the lovely home of Tabitha Potts, award-winning author.
Hello, lovely to see you.
How are you doing? So first off, do you fancy telling us a bit about yourself?
My name's Tabitha Potts, and I'm studying for my creative writing MA at Birkbeck. I've just started in my second year. I've had quite a few short stories published and some poems, and I'm currently working on a novel which I'm hoping to submit for my dissertation next year.
Oh, fantastic. I know you've had quite a big change in career path, because before, correct me if I'm wrong, you were working in marketing and digital content, but what inspired this change to becoming an author and a poet?
It's a complicated answer to that question, but I always wanted to be a writer, but I either lacked the confidence to really go for it, or I lacked time, financial resources, all of those things. When my children were younger, that was my excuse. The children were, took up too much time, and so on. And I had an interesting job working for for charities, doing digital marketing. But I'd become sort of increasingly frustrated and wanted to really just focus on writing and improve at it. And also in my personal life, I'd been through some bereavements, and it made me realise that life is very short, and I really just wanted to focus on something that I thought would make me happy. And so one day I just sat down and wrote a resignation email and sent it before I could think twice, and I immediately felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders.
Amazing.
I was like, okay, I've done the right thing. Sometimes you don't know until after you've done it whether it was the right thing to do or not. At the moment I'm working part-time, but I'm essentially focused on writing now.
We're in your home and it's absolutely lovely. Thank you very much for having us. I mean, just in reference to that, in your short story The Gift, you make reference to East London architecture and the housing generally being old as they're about to fall apart. But would you suggest that living in East London has impacted your writing and your kind of creative way of thinking in that way?
Hugely. I moved here when I was about 9 or 10, so I went to a local primary school. My mother bought at that time, more or less derelict house on Brick Lane, and we moved there to live with her. And it was a very different place back then. It was very poor and run down. There was a lot of deprivation generally. There still is, but it's a lot less visible. And it had moments of being almost sort of Dickensian. I used to walk home from school past sort of prostitutes along Fashion Street. It really was a very different place at that time, but it had a real sort of drama and sort of beauty in the architecture and just in the place. And the people are sort of fascinating and resilient and just wildly interesting people. I think it's remained a source of inspiration for me ever since. I find it fascinating. Gritty, but it's also glamorous.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
my feeling about it.
So I mean, going back to your work actually, what is it about the medium of short stories that you enjoy working with so much? What I really love is, in a novel you have to build a whole world and whole backstories for every character. You have to really think about their interactions over a long period of time. And in a short story you have this amazing opportunity to literally capture perhaps a moment in time or a few moments, and yet those can have all the weight of a backstory and a whole story world, but you don't have to explore them in depth. It's literally just narrowing everything down to an essence. And it's why I love writing them, but I also find them really quite challenging. No, definitely. So it's a constant battle to try and get it right. Do you find that similar with the poetry you write as well? I find that poetry is much more instinctive. It always has been for me. Bye, Dexter. Usually, sometimes with a story, I'll
be inspired by something I read in the paper, or even something, a conversation I hear on the bus. With a poem, it's usually a phrase that comes into my mind, and then I just have to sit down and write it straight away.
Sure.
It feels a bit more mysterious than short story writing for me, and I can't make it happen to order.
No, definitely. I mean, kind of having read through your stuff, be it your poetry or your short stories, you use quite a lot of kind of surprise endings and quite dramatic, but also very much emotional and quite heavy kind of closes to stories. Is there kind of a reason for this?
Absolutely. I'm drawn to stories which do go sort of quite deep. So I want to often look at people in sort of slightly extreme emotional states.
Right, I see.
I find that more dramatic, and I guess I'm just drawn to that kind of writing.
Sure.
But I like to surprise readers, and I hope it hasn't become too much of something I do every time. But I like to try and surprise readers.
No, definitely. I mean, I wouldn't suggest that at all, in the sense that it's become kind of consistent. It was just something I kind of latched onto.
No, absolutely. It's something I definitely do, and I think it's partly instinctive, but I think it's also, I just like the feeling of trying to leave someone guessing a little bit, asking questions. What's that really mean? You know?
Yeah, exactly. I think it works especially in a story like Beneath the Skin, where it is very much kind of, the ending is very much kind of, it's quite jarring, and you obviously think about the situations people find themselves in and how they kind of deal with medical issues in obviously quite a pragmatic, but obviously a very emotional and hard-hitting way consistently.
That was based on my own experience of chemotherapy.
Oh, really? Okay.
Because I had cancer last year, and I had to go through treatment.
Sure.
And it's essentially what I realised going through this treatment, which I was absolutely terrified of. I was completely panicked. But once I started to go through it, I actually realised that in many ways I was lucky. I had a lot of support from family and friends around me, and one thing I realised from talking to other people is some women are having to go through this pretty much on their own.
Yeah.
And so I wrote that story as a way of trying to sort of make sense of my own experience, but also thinking about other women and what it might be like to go through it without any real support.
No,
and
sure.
I think that's what the emotional side of that story is about. It's a feeling of complete isolation.
Yeah.
And the nurse in the story is her sort of bridge back to the world, really.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely comes across, and I think in that sense I do find it a really successful story, if that's the right terminology.
Thank you.
No, I mean, it is just in your writing, I do find myself very much attached to the characters, and I do find myself very much kind of wanting to know more about them. I mean, especially in your story Swing Me, the way that you build up the emotional structure of the story is different to how you approach your other stories, from what I've read anyway, and I feel like that felt quite interesting, and obviously because it is more kind of horror-esque and works more with that kind of landscape of things, it felt like you had to adjust that more. Would that be correct in saying?
Swing Me is a story which is about a young single mum who, with a little girl, who meets an attractive, apparently single dad on the school run who has a little son, and their children are friends, but what you hadn't realised is that the father and son are actually ghosts. And what I wanted to do was just bring out the idea of the supernatural in a very mundane setting, contrasting the everyday with something really unsettling.
Yeah, definitely.
And to do that, I needed to have both elements in the story quite early.
You mentioned obviously kind of your issues with medical conditions in the past, and the tone of your stories is obviously quite heavy and is quite dark, and I was wondering, apart from obviously with Beneath the Skin, has your own kind of life and the impact that stuff has happened to you affected how you've written?
I think it must have done. I'm actually quite a cheerful person in everyday life, believe it or not.
Sure.
But in my writing, I seem to be drawn towards more darker stories.
Sure.
I think this may even just be a sort of, to do with my personality. I had a poem published when I was about 7, which was about being the last person left on Earth. So, I may just have had a kind of gloomy sort of mentality.
Sure.
But no, I think I'm interested in, as I was saying, in evoking emotions and maybe fear or sort of sorrow when someone reads a story, and I think to do that you have to sometimes just go to darker places.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it can't all be cheery.
Yeah.
So just kind of speaking about your successes as an author, last year Beneath the Skin won the Almaty League Flash Fiction Award, and I was just wondering, would you kind of value that your greatest success or achievement as an author today, or what as an author and a writer and a creative do you deem successful?
Well, I think having an award, even being longlisted, I've been longlisted for the RA Royal Academy Pin Drop Awards this year. So awards are immensely encouraging and cheering and make you feel you're on the right path.
Yeah.
But I think the two moments for me that made me feel like, oh wow, I am actually on my way to becoming a writer is seeing a printed copy of a book with your words in it. That's one moment. Yeah. When you hold it in your hands, that's one moment. And the other moment is when someone tells you they've read one of your stories and talks to you about it. So like we've been doing, sure. It's a wonderful moment because you're actually communicating with a reader, and I think that's for me that's the most exciting moment, because it's communicating your ideas and thoughts to another person.
So in this respect, just with other, I'm just sorry as I just stare into the eyes of Dexter. I was just going to ask whether you could recommend any authors from this year that particularly stuck out to you.
Yes, I've really enjoyed Laura Purcell's The Corset, which is a historical Gothic story with a lot of supernatural elements, and it's great. It's a really good read. I've also just finished Normal People by Sally Rooney, which is a sort of contemporary kind of mixed up love story, mainly set in Dublin, and that's quite different, but it's very good on communication difficulties between sort of young men and women in particular, and I found it very interesting. And at the moment I'm reading Bitter Orange by Claire Fuller, which is about a kind of house full of sort of mysteries and secrets, and I love stories which feature old houses. So I'm really enjoying that. I haven't finished it yet, but so far it's a great read, and there are a lot of amazing writers around at the moment. It's rather intimidating, but yes, it's a fantastic time for writing generally, I think.
No, definitely. Well, it's been fantastic to speak to you, and thank you so much for having me in your home and meeting your dogs. And I really look forward to kind of keeping up with your work and seeing how everything progresses. Thank you very much, Lucas, and thanks for your wonderful questions. It's been interesting to talk to you. Awesome, thank you very much. Thanks a lot, guys.